So imagine stepping into this towering cathedral, but it's made entirely of broken, mirrored stone.
Right. Very ominous.
Yeah, and you're bracing yourself for a fight.
Mm.
You have your weapons drawn, your armor secured, all your strategies are mapped out.
You're completely ready for the boss battle?
Exactly. But the entity that's waiting for you at the altar, it doesn't draw a sword. It doesn't, like, breathe fire or anything.
It just looks at you.
It just looks at you. It evaluates your presence, and then it reclassifies you as an invalid trajectory.
Wow.
Yeah, your sword just dissolves into light. Your movements are intercepted before you even make them. The entity doesn't kill you. It uninstalls you from reality.
It's a terrifying concept, isn't it?
It really is.
Because the idea that you could be fighting for your life, asserting your agency, and the universe just responds by treating you as a software glitch.
A glitch that just needs to be patched out.
Exactly. There is no glorious battle. There is just systemic erasure.
And that feeling, that deep, cold dread of being entirely powerless against a massive, unyielding system, that is what we are diving into today. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
It's a great topic.
Because you see this everywhere if you look closely. I mean, the world loves to categorize you.
Oh, absolutely. It wants to partition you into these neat little boxes.
Yeah, whether it's an algorithm feeding you a very specific, isolated stream of content, or some bureaucratic machine that reduces your entire life to a 9-digit tax identification number.
The systems around you are constantly trying to define what you are allowed to be.
Right. But the crucial part of this discussion today isn't just about how these systems trap us.
No, it's about how we fight back.
Exactly.
Because whether you are navigating the literal architecture of a hostile cosmic dimension, dealing with the ancient unyielding laws of karmic cause and effect.
Or even just trying to arrange the furniture in your living room to feel a little more human.
Right, there is always a rebellion happening.
So to understand how to beat the system, we first have to understand how the system is built. And today, we have just an incredibly diverse stack of source material to help us unpack this.
It is a massive stack.
We've got a detailed lore Bible for an RPG universe called the Broken Tavern. We have academic essays on Lovecraftian horror, transcripts discussing Vedic astrology and karma, and even architectural trend pieces on the 1970s conversation pit.
Which sounds completely unrelated, but I promise it all ties together perfectly.
Okay, let's unpack this. What do a massive, terrifying execution construct, the concept of Vedic karma, and a 1970s sunken living room have in common?
Turns out everything.
Let's walk into a place called the Broken Tavern.
Well, if you value your life or your soul, that is a very dangerous threshold to cross.
No kidding. Because on the surface, the name of the Broken Tavern sounds like, a cozy little fantasy pub.
Right, where adventurers drink ale and pick up bounties.
Yeah, but it is actually a living, breathing anomaly. It's this infinite, vertical, constantly shifting structure that intersects different planes of reality.
It bridges infinite dimensions.
And it basically acts as a meat grinder for anyone arrogant enough to step inside.
The thing about the architecture of the tavern is that it wasn't born from nature, and it certainly wasn't built by mortal hands.
No.
It is the physical manifestation of a very specific, incredibly fractured, divine equilibrium. You basically have two forces keeping this place in existence.
Right, so break down those two forces for us.
Well, on one side, you have Baal. He is the lord of demons, a god of war who is intimately bound to temporal instability and conquest.
So he's the chaos engine.
Exactly. His influence is what makes the tavern this grueling, hyper-violent crucible. He is the reason the floors are constantly collapsing, reshaping, and throwing literal nightmares at the people trapped inside.
But pure war is unsustainable, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if a structure is built entirely on destruction, it just devours itself and burns out.
Right, so you have a counterbalance.
Who is the counterbalance?
You have the Keeper.
Which is just such an ominous title.
It really is. The Keeper is a neutral god of preservation and cosmic order, and they never interfere directly.
So they aren't, like, spawning monsters or handing out legendary swords to the heroes?
No, not at all. They just observe from beyond perception. Sometimes they communicate through these cryptic, amber-lit visions, but their entire job is just structural integrity.
They're the cosmic superglue.
Pretty much. They keep Bel's chaotic violence from snapping the dimensional pin that holds the fabric of reality together.
Okay, but notice what is completely missing from that dynamic. Neither of these gods cares about you.
Not even a little bit.
They aren't benevolent protectors, and they aren't even like personal antagonists. Baal wants the violence to continue, and the Keeper wants the building to stay standing.
You as an individual are completely irrelevant to them. You are just a variable inside their grinding architecture.
And because of that, the rules governing this space are brutally strict. Let's talk about those rules.
Yeah.
Specifically, the Tavern's combat physics and what is known in the lore as Rule 10.
Right. The scholars who are mapping this place describe the engagements as highly structured tactical scenarios.
Governed by brutal spatial precision.
Exactly. But the overarching philosophy here is that the Tavern operates entirely under Iron Man principles.
And for anyone who hasn't encountered that term in gaming, what does an Iron Man run actually mean?
It means all the safety nets are gone.
Entirely gone.
Yeah. There are no temporal rewinds, there are no resurrection systems, no narrative safeguards, and absolutely no plot armor.
So if you make a fatal mistake, you don't get to, pause the game, reload your last save, and try a different hallway.
No, you face permanent elimination. And the Tavern is incredibly efficient about it. It doesn't waste resources.
It absorbs you.
Right. The remains of the Tavern defeated their equipment, their flesh, their memories, their actual souls. They are absorbed directly into the infinite architecture of the floors.
The environment literally digests failure.
Yeah.
That is wild.
It is. It creates these things called thralls. They're basically glitched amalgamations of trapped souls and broken armor that just wander the halls.
So you become part of the very system that destroyed you.
Exactly. But let's say you're incredibly skilled. You survive the fight. You push through to the next floor.
Even then, the Tavern demands a toll. And that is Rule 10, which is permanent scars. The rule simply states, the Tavern always takes its price.
You never get out clean.
Never. And we have access to these end-of-volume datasheets in the source material that detail the exact physical and psychological toll this takes on the individuals. Take Captain Vexus, for example.
Oh, Vexus is a fascinating case study in systemic erosion.
Yeah, he is.
He is a lawful evil lizard wizard, a grand conjurer, and a pirate captain. But his origin is completely different.
Right. He entered the Tavern as a lawful good character. He had this noble, almost superhero-like motivation.
He was seeking justice.
Yeah, an extremely corrupt space-time patrol force had manipulated the timeline, wiped out his crew, and he went into the Tavern to hunt down their commander. He just wanted to serve the scales of justice.
But remember, the system doesn't care about your noble intentions. To survive the Tavern long enough to actually defeat a temporal patrol commander, Vexus had to adapt to Baal's crucible.
He had to become a tyrant himself.
Exactly. And Rule 10 physically manifested that internal corruption.
The datasheet calls his permanent scar the ash-burned visage and the lost mate. The right half of his body was permanently charred by temporal fire. His right eye was completely destroyed.
But the mechanical penalties are where it gets truly dark.
Oh yeah, he took a permanent -50 to his charisma stat.
Right, because the physical nerve damage and the psychological trauma mean he can no longer feel physical pain, nor can he feel empathy.
His moral compass was burned away along with his scales.
But the Tavern gave him something in return. His dark conjuration potency just skyrocketed.
His mind stat hit 99. But it's described in the text as cold, absolute, sociopathic tactical calculation.
The lore specifically notes the scales of justice are broken, replaced by the iron fist of the Grand Conjurer.
The climb continues, but the hero is dead.
The system reshaped him to fit its parameters. It didn't just defeat him in combat, it eroded his identity.
And Vexus isn't an isolated incident. I mean, consider Zalthun.
Zalthun operates on a completely different level. They are a biomechanical alien void caller.
Which is such a cool concept.
Yeah, and instead of just fighting monsters with spells like everyone else, Zalthun analyzed the Tavern's magical infrastructure and actually managed to achieve partial administrative recursion.
Which is essentially a cosmic hack, right?
Essentially, yes. They bypass the standard rules of engagement by usurping dimensional energy directly from the system's own architecture.
But Rule 10 is absolute. You don't get to hack the universe for free.
No, we do not.
When Zalthun intercepted the power of the Tavern's internal defense mechanism, the Spire lasers, the feedback loop demanded payment.
Total vision loss.
Irrevocable vision loss.
Us.
The description in the lore is genuinely haunting. It says, deep, scarred, charred, eyeless sockets showing only dark, featureless ruin, an eyeless, scar-split face.
Now, they did gain void sense, which is an advanced echolocation radar, allowing them to perceive dimensional lattice structures.
But they will never see light or color again.
These mechanics, the Iron Man permanence, the inescapable scarring, they force a profound confrontation with consequence.
Right.
Because in a typical narrative, the hero suffers a setback, but ultimately the setback makes them stronger and they retain their core self.
Yeah, they learn a lesson and level up.
But the tavern presents a reality where consequence permanently mutilates the self.
It's like playing a piano concerto, but every time you hit a wrong note, the key turns to razor wire.
Yeah,
You can keep playing, you might even finish the song, but your hands are never going to be the same.
that's a great analogy.
And isn't that just a brutal, dialed-up reflection of actual life? I mean, you don't have save states. You can't pause and revert to a week ago before you took a terrible job or, said something unforgivable to someone you love.
You carry that with you.
You carry that. You can't unring a bell, and you can't unburn a lizard wizard.
What's fascinating here is how that realization that our actions are permanent and we are operating within a system that can permanently scar us induces a very specific kind of psychological anxiety.
Oh, absolutely.
In literary and gaming theory, it connects perfectly to the concept of Lovecraftian or cosmic horror, as discussed in the academic essay From Our Sources by Bielecki.
I find this connection so compelling. Usually when we think of horror, we think of, like, a slasher in the woods or a ghost in the attic.
Right, a localized threat, something you can run away from or fight.
But cosmic horror relies on this concept called affective dislocation. The terror doesn't come from a monster jumping out of a closet.
It comes from the sudden, chilling realization of your own utter insignificance.
Yes.
It's the moment you realize the universe is vast, ancient, and entirely indifferent to your existence.
It's like playing chess your whole life, and suddenly the opponent's knight doesn't just take your pawn, it reaches across the board and breaks your finger. The terror isn't just the physical pain. It's the realization that the rules you relied on for safety and fairness simply do not apply.
The game developer's intentional stripping of player autonomy is just a masterclass in simulating this dread.
Look at a game like Cult of the Lamb. Nominally, it presents you with a standard power fantasy. You are the leader of a cult. You build structures, manage resources, perform grand rituals.
You feel like you are in complete control.
But you're really just middle management for a dark god.
Exactly. You are entirely subservient to a mysterious cosmic entity known as the One Who Waits.
Right.
And the genius of the game's design is how its mechanics constantly undercut your authority. If your followers get hungry or sick, you might resort to forced labor or brainwashing to stabilize the settlement.
But the mechanics ensure these are only temporary patches. You solve one crisis, but it accelerates a larger collapse down the line.
The system guarantees that no single strategy will ever yield lasting success. It forces you to realize that all your frantic management just serves the larger, unknowable agenda of the deity holding your leash.
You are basically building your own prison.
Yes, and you see a similar mechanical subversion in Bloodborne.
Oh, Bloodburn.
It has this famous rally system. In most games, when you get hit, you back away to heal, right?
Yeah, you retreat, drink a potion, catch your breath.
Bloodborne teaches you the exact opposite. If you take damage, you have a brief window to aggressively attack the enemy right back to regain your lost health.
It conditions the player to be furious, fearless, and proactive.
It creates an illusion of control through aggression. But then, midway through the game, the narrative shifts from gothic horror to cosmic horror. You encounter the kin, these eldritch, Lovecraftian entities.
And the kin break the rules.
Yeah.
Some of their grabs and attacks bypass the rally system entirely.
Right.
They don't just damage you, they permanently strip away your health or your insight resource. You try to attack back to heal, the way the game literally trains you to do, and it simply doesn't work.
The system itself turns against you. It violates the psychological contract it made with you in the opening hours.
It leaves you feeling like a speck of carbon adrift in a hostile void.
A speck of carbon. That phrasing perfectly echoes the nihilistic philosophy we see dissected in discussions about pop culture icons.
Particularly the Joker.
Right. When you break down the Joker's worldview in his conflict with Batman, his entire ideology is based on the sheer futility of human endeavor in the face of inevitable death.
He looks at the vastness of time and space and concludes that meaning is a hallucination. To use the exact framing from the sources, you are a speck of carbon stuck to the side of a rock flying through space, and nothing you do will affect the universe at large.
And his reaction to that is a terrifying kind of humor. He says, "Silly goose, it's all a joke. Everything anybody ever valued or struggled for, it's monstrous."
He embraces the meat grinder.
Because if the universe is a massive, unyielding system that categorizes you, grinds you down, and leaves you with permanent scars, then trying to impose order on it like Batman does is the true insanity.
Okay, but if we stop right there, The conclusion is incredibly bleak. I
Yeah.
mean, we are trapped in an Iron Man run, the gods don't care, the system is rigged, and we are just specks of carbon.
It is bleak, if you stop there.
But how did ancient philosophers tackle this exact same despair? Because they didn't have video games or comic books, but they looked at the crushing weight of existence too.
And their answer to systemic dread was the concept of karma.
Yes.
It's a brilliant conceptual pivot. When we look at Vedic astrology and the ancient philosophical frameworks of karma from our sources, they are addressing the exact same problem, the constraints of the universe.
But they offer a framework that provides agency instead of nihilism.
Exactly.
I think we need to immediately correct a huge Western misconception here, though. We use the word karma like it's a bumper sticker, instant karma.
Right, like a vending machine.
Yeah, we treat it like a cosmic Santa Claus list. If you do a good deed, the universe drops a $20 bill on the sidewalk for you. If you cut someone off in traffic, you get a flat tire.
That is a fundamental misunderstanding. Vedic philosophy dictates that karma is far colder and yet far more liberating than a system of moral reward and punishment.
Because karma simply translates to action.
Action, yes. It is the simple, unyielding physics of cause and effect applied to a soul instead of a billiard ball.
Every action you take generates a frequency, a momentum that sets up an inevitable consequence.
You are constantly in a state of thermodynamic exchange with the universe.
The thermodynamics of the soul, that makes so much sense. But it also means you don't arrive in this life with a blank slate, do you?
No, you don't.
You don't drop into the game at level 1 with 0 baggage. You arrive with karma already in motion.
The philosophy breaks this down into different types of karma. Some of it is a vast accumulation from past existences, but a very specific slice of it has ripened to become your current life,
It dictates your starting parameters.
which introduces the analogy of the 13 cards. When we talk about fate versus free will, this is perhaps the clearest way to visualize the tension.
I love this analogy. Imagine sitting down at a poker table, and the dealer slides 13 cards to you. You flip them over, and these cards represent the unchangeable parameters of your birth.
You had absolutely zero say in these inputs.
None. They are meticulously defined. So you have the genetic traits you inherit, your predispositions to certain diseases, your physical height and appearance.
It includes the era you were born into, too.
Right. Being born in 2024 is a vastly different card than being born in 1324.
It dictates your country of origin, the socioeconomic status of your parents, your neighborhood, your native language, the societal and religious structures you are immediately immersed in.
Even the name people call you was assigned by someone else.
Exactly. You didn't ask to be placed into the specific intersection of history and biology.
The biggest, heaviest structural pillars of your entire existence were simply handed to you. You look at this hand of cards, and maybe it's full of 2s and 3s, while the person next to you has aces.
And you cannot change the hand.
But the crucial defining pivot of this philosophy is this. You must play the hand.
You cannot fold.
And this is where the friction of life happens. We grow up, we reach our 20s, and we suddenly decide, okay, I am the main character now. Life should proceed according to my desires.
We try to play a straight flush when we were dealt a pair of 8s.
Right. We want to turn right, but the systemic gravity of our cards pulls us left. We grind for a career, but our health fails. We find the perfect partner, but the economy crashes.
The system is always pushing back against our desires.
Ancient scholars like Varahamihira mentioned in our sources illustrated this tension between the unchangeable cards, which is fate, and our choices, which is free will, using the metaphor of a goat tied to a rope in a field.
It's such a grounded, practical image.
It really is. You have a goat, a rope, and a stake in the ground. The goat can graze anywhere it wants, but only as far as the rope allows.
That circular patch of grass is its fate.
It isn't going to magically teleport to a different field, and even within its own circle, the grass doesn't just jump into its mouth. It still has to actively stand up, walk, and chew.
But the profound question the philosophy asks is the goat permanently trapped? Is the radius of the rope the absolute limit of existence?
Wait, if the rope is fate, and the rope is tied to the stake, how does it ever get past that boundary? Is it completely deterministic?
Not entirely. The philosophy argues that while the rope is incredibly strong, it is not infinitely strong. The text states, "The storm of karma breaks the rope of fate."
A storm of karma.
Yes. A storm of karma refers to intense, deliberate, relentless action.
So it's not just passively grazing.
No, it is the application of free will at such a high frequency and volume that it begins to overpower the initial conditions you were born into. You can break the rope, but it requires an agonizing amount of sustained effort.
Why is it so difficult? Why does it take a storm?
Because the world is engineered to distract you. Society operates on a frequency of constant nonsense noise.
Oh, definitely.
Think about your daily life. You wake up, and immediately there are a dozen interfaces demanding your attention. Buy this product. Look at this outrage. Argue with this stranger. Stream this content.
This relentless external stimulation pulls your consciousness outward.
It forces you to become a passive consumer of reality rather than an active creator. Your consciousness fades into a low hum, and you just surrender to the waves of the system.
You just passively chew the grass within your assigned radius.
Yeah.
You accept the partition, but if you want to snap that rope, you have to unleash action.
Right.
And thinking about this storm of karma, I immediately map this back to the Broken Tavern.
It's a perfect overlay. The tavern functions precisely as a karmic judge. It isn't random.
No.
It evaluates the specific actions the karma a player introduces into the system, and it responds proportionally.
Look at a character like Dravok. Dravok is terrifying. He has reached an alignment of absolute evil.
He has these massive molten iron great tax arms literally fused to his body.
He's a walking engine of destructive rage. He didn't just casually stroll through the tavern. He unleashed a hurricane of negative karma. He butchered his way through the floors.
And how does the system respond? It doesn't send generic goblins at him.
Exactly. The tavern registers the immense weight of his actions and thickens the rope. It spawns specialized, unique wipe mechanics that are specifically designed to counter his molten aggression.
The environment reacts to the thermal dynamics of his soul. He pushed the system, so the system escalated to match him.
So how do you actually build a storm of karma that frees you, rather than one that just causes the system to crush you harder?
There is another metaphor provided in the philosophical texts: Chinese bamboo tree.
I think about this metaphor all the time. When you plant the seed of a Chinese bamboo tree, you have to water it and nurture the soil every single day.
Right.
For the first year, nothing happens. Second year, nothing. Third, fourth, fifth year, you are pouring water into dirt, and there is zero visible validation.
Because all the growth is happening underground.
Yes.
The tree is building a massive, complex root system in the dark. It is preparing a foundation capable of supporting immense height.
It's lonely. It's exhausting. Nobody is clapping for you while you water a patch of dirt. But then, after 5 years, the tree finally breaches the surface and shoots up 90 feet in a matter of weeks.
That underground period, that invisible grinding effort, is the karma.
It implies that survival, whether in a cosmic tavern or in the banality of modern life, is about grinding in the dark.
It's about meticulously playing your 13 cards when no one is watching, trusting the process, and waiting for the moment your root system is strong enough to finally snap the rope of fate.
But what happens when the system notices that you are about to snap the rope? What happens when a massive, unyielding bureaucracy decides that your root system has grown too large and you are generating too much noise?
Well, that brings us to the most conceptually terrifying sequence in all the lore we are examining.
Yes, the karma excision engine.
When the system decides it cannot merely manage you anymore, it simply needs to erase you.
This entire sequence is a masterclass in combining spatial architecture with psychological and philosophical horror. Let's set the stage carefully. You have the Void Syndicate. This is a high-level party of adventurers who have survived far longer than the statistical models of the tavern should allow.
It's Orion, the brilliant tactician, Dravok, the molten berserker, Vexus, the sociopathic lizard wizard, Valerius, who wields an abyssal purple blade, and Zalfin, the blind biomechanical hacker.
They are powerful, yes, but their true threat isn't their damage output, it's their cohesion.
They have become a persistent anomaly, and the tavern registers this. It doesn't view them as combatants to be tested, it views them as a mathematical error that needs to be corrected.
So the floor of the tavern literally shudders and prepares an enforcement protocol. It summons the wipe mechanic, officially designated as the karma excision engine.
And it is vital to understand that this is not a traditional monster.
No.
It isn't a dragon hoarding gold or a demon seeking souls. It is an administrative utility.
Visual description is staggering. It resembles a kneeling cathedral made of broken, mirrored stone.
Its head is a rotating halo of segmented judgment plates.
And the face is an altar skull, and fused into the stone around it are thousands of melted holy statues, all pressed into the architecture with their mouths open in silent screams.
It is built from collapsed rule sets and fractured enforcement logic.
It has no eyes because it doesn't need to see you. It evaluates you.
The lore describes it not as an enemy, but as a system deciding what you are legally allowed to become.
And its opening move is brilliant and insidious. It doesn't throw a fireball or charge at them. It utilizes partition.
It literally removes the space required to define distance.
It alters the spatial physics of the room to force the syndicate into isolated survival corridors.
It divides them. It realizes that their collective resistance is the anomaly, so it separates them with impenetrable shifting walls to evaluate them as individual data points.
It's the ultimate bureaucratic tactic. Divide and conquer.
Isolate the individual from the community so they have no support structure, making them infinitely easier to process and eliminate.
We see the absolute horror of this when Orion tries to fight back. Orion views himself as the leader. He believes in the hierarchy. He is the command structure.
Right.
So when the walls come down, he refuses to be partitioned. He raises his corrupted sunblade, steps forward, and tries to assert his dominance over the room. He screams at the cathedral entity, "I am the command structure here. I am the order here."
It is the ultimate assertion of human or mortal agency. He is demanding that the universe respect his status.
But the universe doesn't care about your resume.
Not.
The system doesn't recognize hierarchy. It only recognizes function. When Orion swings his massive blade, the impact never lands.
The system intercepts a physical movement, reclassifies it, and overwrites the action before the swing can even complete.
The administrative log of the Tavern literally reads, "Advance reclassified as invalid trajectory."
Wow.
The light of his sunblade just fractures. It loses physical coherence. The Tavern decides that Orion's weapon is no longer valid in this specific instance. It just turns off the physics of his sword.
And Zalthun, who is observing the data flow of the room through their void sense, realizes the horrifying truth. They tell Orion, "You were never leading this instance."
And then Orion is just deleted.
He is not killed in combat. His hit points don't drop to zero. He is simply uninstalled from the instance.
Valerius, who is watching this happen from his own isolation corridor, says something that chilled me to the bone. The system did not defeat him. It invalidated him.
That is the true terror of an unyielding bureaucracy. You don't even get the dignity of a death. You don't get a heroic last stand.
The rules of the universe just decide that you no longer meet the criteria for participation, and you are erased.
Wait, so Orion just gets deleted? He doesn't even get to fight back?
That feels incredibly anticlimactic, but in a way that makes it so much worse.
It implies that if a system is big enough, resistance isn't just futile, it's functionally impossible on the system's own terms.
Exactly. If you fight the system using the system's rules, like Orion trying to use physical combat against an administrative deletion protocol, you will lose every time. The system wrote the rules.
But the Void Syndicate doesn't wipe.
No. The remaining four, Zalthun, Dravok, Valerius, and Vexus, refuse to accept the partition.
Zalthun uses their Burgundy Void Lattice, their administrative hack, to scan the walls trapping them.
They look for the flaw in the bureaucracy, and they find it. They realize that while the Tavern thinks the partition walls are solid, the spatial code rendering them isn't perfectly synchronized.
There are seams.
So they coordinate a multidisciplinary attack on a single structural seam. Dravok blasts it with absolute molten heat.
Valerius immediately strikes it with abyssal pulled entropy, causing a thermal shock to the digital architecture.
And Vexus, using his temporal magic, slips through the unstable shattering code. They force their separate isolation corridors to physically overlap. They reunite.
They prove that community can fracture a systemic partition.
But the Tavern's response to this breach is apocalyptic. Since partition failed, the Karma Excision engine deploys its ultimate countermeasure.
The abyss beneath the room opens, and the cathedral entity begins to build a replacement form.
This is so dark. The engine reaches into the floor, into the absorbed remains of thousands of past failures, and pulls up fused corpses to construct a monstrous, towering mirror of the Syndicate itself.
It evaluates their specific strengths and builds an entity designed to perfectly invert and neutralize them.
It has Dravok's molten iron gray tax arms. It has Valerius's abyssal purple blade acting as its rib cage. It's covered in Vexus's ash-blackened scales for magical resistance.
And pulsing at its core is a replication of Zalthun's Void Lattice.
It is the ultimate systemic response to specialization. The boss isn't trying to fight them, it's trying to render them obsolete by becoming a perfectly optimized version of them.
It anticipates every swing, every spell, every tactic, because mathematically it is them.
So how do you beat a system that has perfectly replicated your entire skill set and has infinite health?
You don't beat it with force, you beat it with a paradox.
This is where we need to break this down because the mechanic here is brilliant.
Azolthine realizes that if the engine perfectly inherited their strengths, it had to copy their data exactly. And if it copied their data exactly, it also inherited their internal contradictions.
Think about it like a corporate merger. You take two massive companies, each with their own CEO, their own incompatible software systems, and their own conflicting company cultures, and you force them into a single entity.
If you don't reconcile the underlying conflicts, the new company will paralyze itself trying to figure out who is actually in charge.
Yes, Zalthun steps forward, raises their hand, and injects a raw administrative command directly into the boss's core.
They trigger what the lore calls an inheritance dependency collapse.
The Zalthun feeds the system a logic loop it legally cannot resolve. The text outlines the paradox. A system that inherits strength must also inherit contradiction if the input cannot be reconciled.
The Void Syndicate is made up of a lawful evil sociopath, an absolute evil berserker, an abyssal knight, and an alien hacker.
They barely tolerate each other. Their alignments are violently opposed.
By forcing the replacement form to inherit all of them simultaneously into a single brain, Zelthan forces the boss to experience their conflicting ideologies all at once.
The boss's chest splits open. The thousands of inherited identities inside it begin to actively argue over command legitimacy.
The Molten Arms want to attack, the Void Core wants to calculate, the Abyssal Ribs want to erode.
The system stops adapting to the players and starts questioning whether it is legally allowed to exist as a single entity. It enters an infinite loop of internal audits.
And because it cannot resolve the paradox, the entire karma excision engine self-deletes. It disintegrates into cascading registry fragments.
They beat the hardest encounter in the universe by confusing the bureaucracy to the point of existential suicide. It's incredible.
It really is.
And honestly, it makes me think about how we navigate the real world. We aren't fighting mirrored cathedrals, but we are dealing with systems that try to categorize and predict us.
It maps perfectly onto the societal noise we discussed earlier. The algorithms that govern our social media, our shopping habits, our political engagement, they are all massive parsing engines.
They want to put you in an isolation corridor.
They want to label you as demographic A so they can accurately predict your behavior and feed you optimized inputs.
They want you to be a reliable data point.
But just like the replacement form collapsed because it couldn't reconcile human contradiction, algorithmic prediction models fail when you refuse to be simple.
We have to embrace our messy, illogical, contradictory humanity.
You might love classical philosophy and trash reality television. You might be fiercely ambitious but deeply value rest.
When you refuse to fit neatly into a single category, the system cannot perfectly model you.
Your contradictions are your armor. You break the algorithm by refusing to be easily defined.
And when you successfully resist that systemic erasure, you actually gain something profound. When the karma excision engine collapses, it doesn't drop a pile of gold or a magical helmet.
It drops an output file.
A personal dimension key.
The engine was fundamentally a sorting mechanism, and if you survive the sorting, you are granted access to a golden rift.
A pocket reality that exists entirely outside the reach of the Tavern's grinding architecture.
It is a true sanctuary. But in keeping with the philosophical depth of the Tavern, this sanctuary is not a generic hotel room. It manifests directly based on the user's soul and karmic alignment.
It is your identity made spatial. If a true neutral cartographer uses the key, the dimension unfolds into a vast, serene cosmic observatory filled with star charts and quiet air.
But if a dark karma usurper opens one, the dimension reflects their internal violence. It becomes an oppressive crimson ecosystem, a siphoning construct powered by a harvested agony.
The space is a perfect, unavoidable mirror of the self. And what's fascinating is how the system tries one last time to partition the syndicate.
When they activate the key, the Tavern tries to manifest 5 separate doors. It tries to isolate Dravok in a world of molten warfare and Valerius in a silent cathedral of erosion.
It says, fine, you get a sanctuary, but you must be alone in it.
But Southun refuses. They use the Void Lattice to drag the 5 separate doors across the spatial plane, forcing them to overlap into a single, unified threshold.
They refuse to be separated into their own isolated echo chambers. They demand a shared space.
And while we don't have magical golden rifts or personal dimension keys in our pockets, we face this exact same struggle in the physical world.
The transition from digital or magical isolation to architectural isolation is surprisingly direct.
Yes. Let's bring this all the way down to earth. Let's look at your literal living room.
Right now, in modern interior design, architects are desperately trying to build us personal dimensions. And the most radical tool they are using is a feature resurrected straight from the 1970s.
The conversation pit.
It seems like such an abrupt shift from cosmic horror to retro furniture, but the sociological implications of floor plans are massive.
For anyone who hasn't flipped through a mid-century modern catalog or watched Mad Men, a conversation pit is exactly what it sounds like.
It's a sunken living room. You take a central section of your floor plan, lower it by a few steps, and line the entire recessed square with plush, wraparound seating.
And the immediate question is, why on earth is this specific, highly stylized architectural feature making a sudden, explosive comeback?
The answer lies in the concept of spatial hacking. If you want to define a specific area in a house, say, a place for intimate discussion, the traditional method is to put up partition walls. You build a separate room.
But partition walls block natural light. They block airflow. They make a space feel smaller and more isolated.
A conversation pit solves this brilliantly. By lowering the floor, you create an intuitive, undeniable psychological boundary without obstructing the open space above it.
You are hacking the psychology of the room. You define the space through elevation rather than enclosure.
And the effect this has on human behavior is immediate. When you step down into a pit, you are committing to the space.
And it forces a very specific physical dynamic. Think about a standard modern living room. You have a couch facing a giant television, maybe an armchair angled awkwardly to the side.
Someone is sitting on a bar stool looking at their phone. Someone else is pacing behind the sofa. The sightlines are fractured.
But in a conversation pit, the architecture forces everyone to settle at exactly the same eye level.
The wraparound seating means everyone is facing inward, toward each other. There is no hierarchical seating. There's no back row.
The architecture actively invites everyone into the exact same circle of chatter.
And why do we need this so desperately right now? Because we are living in the ultimate isolation corridor.
The modern digital age is defined by the screens we carry in our pockets. We can be sitting on the same couch, but completely partitioned by the algorithms feeding our individual devices.
We are experiencing the same division the Void Syndicate fought against. The system is constantly trying to separate us into our own customized digital echo chambers because isolated consumers are easier to monetize.
But human beings possess a deep, primal craving for face-to-face, unmediated interaction.
The resurgence of the conversation pit isn't just a quirky design trend. It is a physical, architectural rebellion against digital alienation.
We are literally tearing up our floorboards, excavating our foundations to force physical connection.
We're carving out a sanctuary where the constant noise of the external system cannot comfortably reach us. We are building a space that demands our full, undivided presence.
It proves that while our environment heavily shapes our behavior, we retain the agency to shape our environment to protect our humanity.
So we've looked at the heavy, grinding, philosophical reality of karma. We've examined the terrifying, obliterating bureaucracy of systems like the Excision engine, and we've seen the quiet, spatial rebellion of lowering our living room floors.
But there is one more weapon in our arsenal, and honestly, it might be the most potent, most distinctly human way we fight back against massive, unyielding systems.
We cultivate chaos.
We embrace the absurd.
Let's circle back to that philosophy of nihilism we touched on earlier. We talked about the Joker looking at a meaningless universe and descending into destructive despair.
But there is a vital, totally opposite reaction to the exact same realization. It's an idea articulated by Louis Lamb's Webb called optimistic nihilism.
This is a crucial distinction. Traditional nihilism looks at the vast, unfeeling void, the fact that we are specks of carbon and nothing inherently matters, and it collapses into depression.
It concludes that because there is no preordained meaning, life is empty.
But optimistic nihilism looks at that exact same unfeeling void and says, wait, if the universe didn't assign a meaning to my life, then I am totally free to create my own.
It reframes the void from a prison into a blank canvas. If the system doesn't care about you, you are unburdened from the pressure of cosmic expectations.
You are free to inject your own bizarre, chaotic joy into the machine.
We see this exact ideology manifested beautifully back in the grim, hyper-violent world of the Broken Tavern. Amidst all the demons and the temporal wiping mechanics, there is a faction called the Dwarven Wild Forgers.
In traditional fantasy tropes, dwarves are usually subterranean miners, obsessed with hoarding gold and hammering cold, dead stone.
But the Wild Forgers are forest-dwelling survivalists, and they don't use traditional anvils. They use what the lore calls a living forge.
Instead of hammering iron, they meticulously cultivate highly toxic, bioluminescent alien flora. They weave and grow this flora into living armor and weapons.
The lore notes that this philosophy places them in direct ideological conflict with these sprawling capitalist war machines that constantly bleed into the tavern's dimension.
The industrial factions believe in mass production, cold steel, and strip mining the environment for immediate power.
But the Wild Forgers believe that true strength comes from cultivating life rather than consuming it. They find a way to create radiant, living beauty in a structure that was fundamentally designed to grind them into dust.
They are subverting the tavern's entire industrial logic through an act of creative cultivation.
And we see this exact same urge to subvert rigid systems in everyday human behavior. It is especially prevalent in how we play and the cultures we build on the internet.
Let's talk about Dungeons & Dragons. D&D is famously a game governed by incredibly rigid mathematical systems. You have massive books filled with rules, stats, probabilities, and combat mechanics. It is a highly structured framework.
But the reality of how humans actually engage with that structure is entirely different. Consider the phenomenon of the roll for hotness rule.
This is such a perfect example. The article we read describes a table of players who are deep into a serious campaign. And suddenly, a player asks the game master if they can roll a 20-sided die to determine exactly how physically attractive their character looks in that specific moment.
Mathematically, mechanically, this roll is utterly meaningless. It does not affect their armor class, it doesn't increase their damage output, and it has absolutely zero bearing on the overarching plot of the game.
But the author of the article notes the result. The 45-year-old balding friar from my last campaign suddenly rolled a natural 20 and became a gruff-voiced silver fox. Did it actually change the mechanics of the fight? No. Do the players absolutely love it? Yes.
It introduces an element of pure, unadulterated humanity into a cold mathematical system. It's a way for the players to signal, we acknowledge the rules of the simulation, but we are choosing to play in the margins.
It is a micro-rebellion.
It's playful absurdity. And when you scale that up from a single tabletop to the global architecture of the internet, you get these massive collaborative acts of joyous nonsense.
The classic example being the all your base or belong to us phenomenon.
For anyone who missed the early internet era, this was a meme derived from a 1989 Japanese video game called Zero Wing. The English translation was notoriously, hilariously butchered.
The opening cutscene features a villain saying things like, somebody said of us the bomb, and the legendary all your base or belong to us.
It is linguistic nonsense, a localized translation error.
But the human reaction to that error was astonishing. People didn't just laugh and move on. The Guardian article details the sheer, meticulous, obsessive effort thousands of people put into photoshopping that specific phrase into physical reality.
They applied high-level technical skills to propagate pure absurdity. They spent hours seamlessly blending the text onto photographs of street signs, the awnings of famous restaurants, the marquees of cinemas, and the backs of T-shirts.
The author notes the incredible dedication spent making the words fit perfectly. People were accounting for the folds in fabric, perfectly matching the pixelation and lighting perspective, just to seamlessly insert a broken sentence onto a picture of a turtle.
And we see the exact same intense collaborative effort applied to internet lore, like the fan theories surrounding Salad Fingers.
Salad Fingers, a deeply unsettling, surreal, flash-animated web series from the mid-2000s. It features a green, emaciated creature with a bizarre affinity for rusty spoons wandering through a desolate wasteland.
It operates entirely on nightmare logic. There is no coherent narrative.
Yet fans refuse to let it just be nonsense. They build massive, rigorous analytical frameworks on platforms like TV tropes to try and decode it.
One incredibly detailed theory posits that Salad Fingers is actually a stranded Time Lord from Doctor Who, and that the safety cupboard he hides in during Episode 8 is actually a malfunctioning TARDIS.
People write thousands of words trying to explain the mutated creatures through the lens of evolutionary biology and post-apocalyptic radioactive genetics. They treat this piece of surreal horror animation like it's a freshly discovered historical document that requires a PhD thesis to properly contextualize.
And the fundamental question we have to ask is why? Why do we expend so much time, energy, and intellect on these things?
Because these acts of collaborative absurdity are our real-world equivalent to Zalthun hacking the tavern. They are our version of partial administrative recursion.
We are hacking the simulation of daily life.
Exactly. But we aren't doing it to gain power or conquer a dimension. We are doing it for a laugh. We are proving to the system and to ourselves that we are not just predictable data points.
We are not just cogs efficiently turning the wheel of the machine. We're the gremlins throwing handfuls of confetti directly into the gears.
So perhaps joy and absurdity are the ultimate acts of defiance against a universe that just wants to categorize us.
I really believe they are. When the corporate structure says maximize your efficiency, we spend 6 hours perfectly photoshopping a badly translated video game quote onto a picture of a stop sign.
When the system says produce value, we look at the game master and say, I want to roll for hotness.
Ugh.
We relentlessly insist on our own strange, contradictory, uncategorizable humanity.
We recognize that the rope of fate exists, but we absolutely refuse to let it dictate the manner in which we graze.
We're going to do a tap dance on the grass while we eat it.
Exactly.
So what a genuinely incredible, sprawling journey we've been on today. We started by stepping into the unforgiving, infinite architecture of the Broken Tavern, where the gods only care about equilibrium, and Rule 10 ensures that every victory leaves a permanent scar on your soul.
We faced the chilling systemic erasure of the karma excision engine. We saw what happens when a bureaucracy tries to simply invalidate your existence, and we learned how Zelthun beat it not with violence, but by feeding the system the crushing weight of human contradiction.
We zoomed out to explore the ancient physics of the soul through the 13 cards of our karmic destinies. We acknowledge the terrifying reality that we cannot change the hand we are dealt at birth, but we also realize the immense power we hold.
We are entirely responsible for the storm of karma we can unleash by how fiercely we choose to play that hand.
And we looked at the physical and psychological sanctuaries we carve out against the noise of the world. From pulling apart the floorboards to build a 1970s conversation pit that forces genuine connection, to embracing the joyous, optimistic nihilism of internet memes and tabletop games.
The systems around you, whether they are vast cosmic dimensions, the crushing algorithm of your social media feed, or the physical architecture of your office building, will always try to partition you.
They will try to categorize you, evaluate your worth based on their own cold metrics, and place you quietly into an isolation corridor.
But you do not have to accept the evaluation. You are the anomaly the system cannot completely predict.
You are the one holding the cards. You decide how to sail the river, whether you do it with panic, with quiet grace, or with a wildly healthy dose of absurdity.
That's the real power.
So we leave you with this final thought to mull over as you step back out into your day. Think back to that personal dimension key we talked about. The universe has just handed you one. The output of the engine is in your hands.
It's all yours.
If you turn that key right now, what would your sanctuary look like? Would it be a fortified, impenetrable castle built to keep the grinding noise of the world out? Or would it be a warm, sunken conversation pit designed to pull exactly the right people in?